Does anyone else feel like we're in a war with normal right now? Life is full of uncertainties and brokenness, and how we respond to the uncertainties and the brokenness varies. Collectively, we know that statement to be true. We're experiencing life that's uncertain and life that's broken, but we're not all on the same boat in how we're responding to those uncertainties and that brokenness. I mean, in some situations, there are people who are like ready to press on through and get back to what seems normal, what was normal. And then there are other people who are really skeptical about going back to what was normal. They're not sure we should head that direction. And then there are other situations where there are people who are absolutely appalled by how normal has been, what normal has been, and they want us to change. And then there are other people who are looking at those type of situations and they're saying, well, the change that you're asking for, I don't want to be a part of that. Like, I don't really think it's needed because my daily life isn't being impacted the way that your daily life is being impacted. And so there are people who just want to dig in and they don't want any type of change. Maybe you don't really care one way or the other. Maybe you're just over the word normal. You've heard it enough and you don't want to talk about normal anymore. Like, let's move on from that topic. But I have to ask you to go ahead and just think about your normalcy, like your normal practices in your life. Like, are your normal practices setting your life on the course that you want to be headed? Are they going to help you end up in the place that you want to end up? We could ask that question really about any area of our life. Like, so for example, is your normal diet, your normal practices when you're eating, are those normal practices leading you to where you want to be health-wise? Or like as a parent or as a spouse or as a friend, are your normal practices helping you to cultivate the relationships that you want in your life? Thinking about our normalcy and our normal practices is really important because sometimes we need to just stop and realize, hey, I'm not headed the direction that I want to go. And I would say that right now we need to do that spiritually. Are we headed the direction that we want to go? It's important for us to just stop and really evaluate the practices in our lives. Are the practices in my life, the practices in your life, leading you to the place you want to be spiritually? Are they cultivating the type of life that you want to be living? I would ask you these type of questions. I would say, do your normal practices demonstrate that you have a love for Jesus? Every day, do your normal practices demonstrate that love? And what practices are you engaged in right now that demonstrate you want your faith, the faith that Jesus has given you, you want that faith to grow? What practices in your life demonstrate that? I mean, your life, my life, as followers of Jesus, they should be marked by practices that show that we're all about Jesus. But sometimes our lives aren't marked in that way. And so we need to stop and we need to say, okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? Like, are there any practices in my life that are actually leading me the direction that I want to go? And maybe you kind of lack the will to develop some of those spiritual practices in your life. Or maybe it's not so much that you've lacked the will, but maybe you've lacked practical knowledge. You just don't know how to develop spiritual disciplines in your life. So I want to talk to you about some spiritual disciplines. In fact, I want to offer you a series of short videos, and each one will highlight some kind of aspect of a discipline, a spiritual discipline that should be in your life if you're following Jesus. So for example, I want to talk to you about how to read the Bible. You know you should probably, and maybe you've been reading books about the Bible, and those books can be so helpful, but more than we read books about the Bible, we need to actually be reading the Bible itself. So I want to share some short practical wisdom and instruction on how to study the Bible and how to pray, and then how to be involved and invested in a local body of believers, and then how to worship through song. And that's not going to be one where I focus on how do you sound good when you're singing, but like, what's the heart behind our worship through song, and how can we cultivate a heart that's all about the things of God when we're worshiping through song? So on Thursday, I'm going to offer my first video, and it's going to begin a 4-part series on how to study the Bible. The videos are going to be short, and I hope that you will engage in those videos and watching those videos and then practicing, putting into practice what's in those videos, because my desire is to help you to grow spiritually, for you to look at your normal and say, hey, this practice right here, it's not really developing me into the person that I desire to be or the person that God desires for me to be. And so what's a good practice that I can replace this one with? I want to offer that to you until Thursday, when you get to hear the information that I have for you on how to study the Bible. I'd love for you to continue to kind of evaluate where you are in your normal practices. Like, what are your normal spiritual practices? What are your just normal daily practices in general? And are those practices developing you into the person that you want to be and developing your life into the life that you want to live? And then what is the life that you want to live? Or what do you think God's goal is, his heart for you? What kind of life does he want you to live? I want you to begin to think about those things. And then would you just very simply just say to God, God, help me to develop practices that will help me to mature. I find it so fascinating in the Bible that Jesus spent time teaching his disciples really practical things, like how to pray. It wasn't like Jesus was like, follow me, and then suddenly the disciples knew everything. They knew how to live their lives. They knew what practices they should be engaged in. Instead, Jesus was really like, this is how you do it. I mean, he gave some real practical instruction. And then he modeled for his disciples a life full of spiritual disciplines. So when I look at Jesus, I really see, hey, my life is supposed to be full of spiritual disciplines too. And if I were honest with you, I would say my life has been. And that doesn't mean that I'm perfect. That doesn't mean that every day I get every spiritual discipline right, or I do it the way that I think is right, or I do it in the best way possible. But rather, my life has really, over the course of over 20 years, just been about inviting Jesus into some of my practices and making some of my practices really about Jesus. And God has matured me through those practices, just as Jesus matured his disciples through the practices that he taught and modeled for them. And I want that for you. So would you join me on Thursday, and would you join me with a heart that's ready to begin to just develop and adopt some practices in your life? See you then.